Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about a number of interesting bell-like instruments. I'm actually going to start with the least common one so I can get it off the table. This instrument here is called a Beltre. So if you run into any literature that calls for a Beltre, this is what they mean. So it's a series of graduated bronze discs. Sometimes you'll see it laying on a table like this, or sometimes it'll stand upright. The two most common ways to play this are to run usually up. I very rarely will ever see a gliss down, but you'll usually run up the length of the instrument. It's like that thing when we all had the children's books. Now it's time to turn the page. You'll probably do that with a hard mallet, a metal mallet, or a hard acrylic. If you want something softer, you can turn it over and use the back of a mallet. Again, glissing down doesn't happen very often, but you might run into it occasionally. The other technique that might get called for this instrument is to actually take the instrument and just play discrete pitches, meaning that you would only hit one of the chimes at a time. These are not typically tuned instruments, so you won't have a call to like play the F sharp on the Beltre or something like that. But you'll run into some aleatoric literature that calls for just random sound points, right? In which case you just strike individual ones. And again, that's not very common, but it does show up every once in a while. All right, so that's the Beltre. The two noisiest and hardest to control instruments in the percussion section in terms of sound. The first one is wind chimes. So you'll either see this notated as wind chimes, mark chimes, or a mark tree. That all means the same thing, right? So it's a linear set of graduated chimes, right? So we're not talking about like the wind chimes that you'd hang from that you'd hang from your porch or something like that are usually arranged, in a circle or something like that. We're talking about a linear set of chimes now. And so the typical playing technique is that you will take your hand and you will run them up gliss up or down the length of the chimes. Let that decay a second here. Gliss down. Now, an alternate to that, if you want a little richer sound, is to take your hand and basically do this and activate the chimes gradually as you go up. And so instead of having a more linear effect, you get sort of a richer cluster effect. And then again, that's just for something that's a little less linear, right? So let me do that again. Versus. Another thing that you might do is take a mallet if you're engaged in playing some other instruments and you don't have time to put a mallet down and use your hands. You can play them with a mallet, but I find the sound to not be as satisfactory, because you'll get a little bit of the scrape of the mallet against the bars. And again, typically we want to activate them from the bottom where they're going to move the most and activate each other, as opposed to running them up along the top here where the string runs through. All right, so that's wind chimes. Again, you'll see that as wind chimes, mark tree, or mark chimes. The last instrument we'll talk about in this video is the sleigh bells, the bane of every percussionist at Christmas time. Sleigh bells these days typically come in some sort of configuration that has a handle so you can hold them. You can still run into old lengths of sleigh bells from when they were used, to actually connect horses to carts. I actually have a set at home of a long run of 90 sleigh bells. On a leather strap, but typically they come in a much smaller, more portable configuration. Usually you will, there's a couple different ways to do this. Usually you will grasp the bells with your hand while they're hanging down, and then you'll strike the top of the handle with the fleshy part at the base of your hand. All right? An alternate to that, if you want something slightly with a little less attack, is to hold them horizontally, and then you can just strike the bells themselves with an open hand. If you get something where you need a sustain of any kind, if you don't have time to move, you can just shake them this way. But if you have time to actually get your hand turned over, you can give them a nice, good rattle. Like that. Couple of logistical things that are very helpful. If you get a set of sleigh bells with a bell on the bottom, like this one, in order to put them... This is the hardest instrument, along with wind chimes, to pick up and put down quietly. Right, so a couple techniques for that. One is either to just be very careful about it. The other one is actually to integrate the sound of picking them up into the first note that you're going to play. So if I'm counting some rest, for instance, and I'm about to have a bunch of sleigh bells, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right, that can help with that. Another trick is some people will pull this bottom bell off and screw a flat board on it so that the bells will just sit like this, and then they can just be picked up and put down as necessary. Another thing that you can do, maybe a little more complicated, logistically, is to take an old coffee can and put a black towel in it, and then the bells will go in the black towel, and the towel will mute the bells. An important thing about playing them that is very important is that there is a significant delay, because each bell has a little, ball inside that rings around the bell. There is a significant delay between when you hit the instrument and when it will actually sound. So if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like your sleigh bells player is always late, they need to play on the front side of the beat in order for the rhythm to actually be in time. There is a significant delay on this instrument. So, okay, so that's a little bit about the bells. We'll come back in a second with a few more things.